All right, so let's get started. So, so everybody knows this is streaming live on Belmont Media, and that maybe be shared with other local media channels. And I am going to turn on recording of the session now. So this session is being recorded to the cloud, and people who want to watch it later will be able to watch it. And I'll post that on my website, willbrownsberger.com, and people will have the link to watch it. So if you're uncomfortable with that, you feel free to turn off your video. The intention of this conversation is to give a space where people can talk, share feelings, share thoughts about what really is a huge watershed event that occurred last week. I want to just set a few ground rules. I mean, this is a controversial issue. I know there's a diversity of views on my mailing list, and so I hope that we'll all speak to our own views and try not to be characterizing other people's views. I want to move it around. I reserve the right to try to hold people to a minute or two, well, let's say a couple of minutes worth of statement, so that other people can share their own feelings and reactions. And hopefully we'll keep it civil. I'll just start by saying how I feel about this, the issue, just to be crystal clear. And, in my America and in my reading of the Constitution, there is a personal space that belongs to people that should be inviolate, and that the core of that space is one's own body, and people have the right to love who they want to love, have sex with who they want to have sex with, and choose to terminate a pregnancy if that's what they have to do. And I think this Supreme Court has done something that really surprises me, and I just think is flat out wrong. And in reading that right out of the Constitution. And the way they did it was referencing the history and saying, well, the history, the words of the Constitution should be interpreted in light of the practices and when the founders originally authored it, or at the time of Reconstruction. And to me, that's just a flat out wrong idea. I mean, sure, abortion was illegal everywhere, or in most places when that was done. But really, our Constitution contains a whole set of ideals which were entirely unrealized at that time. We said all men are created equal, and we had, at the same time, we had slaves, and we were committing genocide against Native Americans. And so there's a whole lot of fundamental ideals which are articulated in the Constitution, which are contradictory to what was actually happening at that time. So what we're doing really now, the whole arc of our history is to actually realize the ideals of the Constitution. And what happened last week was a big step backwards, and perhaps augurs further steps backwards. So it's a very serious thing. And we in Massachusetts take seriously the work we have to do as a result of that, and I think we're doing that work, and we've already, I think, protected women's right to choose solidly in Massachusetts, so that's a very protected right here, and we also are preparing to protect the rights of those who come here, or those who care for those who come here to seek an abortion. So all of those things are important to us. All of those things are work that we're doing. So I will answer questions if people want to direct a question towards me, but it's not my goal for this to be a talk by Will Brownsberger tonight, but I'm really wanted to just hear from folks and give people the opportunity to hear from each other. So the format is, if you're on Zoom, you can raise your hand by going over to my screen might look a little different than yours, but you have a reactions button, which has my screen has a little picture of a smiley on it when I'm near it with my cursor, and then I can press the raise hand button. So you can do that, and just find that and raise your hand, and I'll recognize people one by one as they come in. And the goal is to give everybody time to weigh in with thoughts. So I see Mel Poindexter at the top of the list here, and Mel is our national committee person from the Democratic Party, and we appreciate you being on the call, Mel.
Thank you, Senator Brownsberger, and thank you for hosting tonight. This is a very important and poignant issue as we sort of reflect back on the achievements that we've made as a organized society. So my question becomes, with the Supreme Court taking the action that it has taken, Massachusetts passing protections in terms of abortion rights and allowing, my understanding, interested persons who fall within the scope of needing assistance to be able to travel from other states. What preparations have we made? Because I have heard that in some states that have put measures on the books, they're really talking about taking legal action against states who, as they put it, hinder the assistance of these parties or citizens of their city, their states, coming to other states for abortions. What preparations have we put in place to protect both ourselves, the doctors, and even the participants who travel here from other states? What things have we done to sort of prepare ourselves for the onslaught of, I'm pretty sure, of a legal challenge?
Yeah. So a couple of things there. First of all, in the long run, I truly believe nothing is ever going to come of those laws, because if you think about it, that invites a litigation free for all among states. We can start passing laws about, what happens if somebody gets shot with a gun in Texas, and, the rights that, that you can sue the whoever sold them the gun in Massachusetts court and recover and so forth. And that ends up in the Supreme Court will never allow states to do that. Even this Supreme Court will recognize where that could possibly go. So, within a year of litigation, this will be over as a threat. However, we are taking it seriously in the interim. We've passed laws designed to protect our providers and people who come here. If people go back to those states, there's nothing we can do. But while people are here, and the people that are doing things here, they're not going to be, our providers they're not going to be able to recover against our providers. We won't extradite people. We won't honor subpoenas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That language is in the Senate budget. We put that, Senator Friedman put that in. The House has just reported out a bill they're going to take up tomorrow that's going to have similar language in it. So I'm confident that language will get adopted in some form. And as I say, in the long run, I think it's entirely, completely untenable for that kind of litigation to be allowed, and it won't happen. Thanks, Mel. Next, I hope that Zoom is presenting me people in the order that they raise their hands, but I think the next person that I see is Bob Weber.
Thanks, Will. I appreciate your hosting this meeting. I just wanted to offer the thought that I hope the House and the Senate will make sure that things like prescription information and other healthcare information will not leak from the state.
Leak from the state? You mean if somebody gets a prescription here and receives medication here, that'll be confidential?
Yeah, what I'm reading in several locations is that there's a well-founded concern that if somebody fills a prescription for one of the abortion medicines, it's possible for people to find that information.
Well, that's a great question. And by the way, let me just introduce one person who's on the call, Maeve Wyson, who's kind of wave a little bit. Maeve, she's kind of in the middle of my screen, but Maeve has been the person on my team that's been working most on these issues, and we'll take a note of that.
It's people like Express Scripts and others who have national databases.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that what happens in Massachusetts needs to stay in Massachusetts.
Yes.
And so I need to leave in a minute, but I just wanted to offer that thought.
We'll check on that. I think that's a good thought to make sure it's on our radar screen. We'll check on with that.
Thank you so much.
All right. Next, I just see iPhone 6 on it, but sir, in the forest there.
Hi, it's Peter Hill. Thank you, Will, for doing this. My concern is basically that they're interfering with medical decision making. Like I don't understand the court's decision because the courts don't. Nothing in the court talks about like open heart surgery or plastic surgery. So none of that is mentioned. The one thing that I would recommend, which the state really can't do, but maybe you can talk to our congressional reps. Senator Murphy did that whole thing with the gun, the problem solvers caucus. I believe that possibly there could be a problem solvers caucus with the abortion issue. I think there are some Republicans, and maybe enough to get to the 60 votes, where they can come up with a basic bill for incest, rape, the viability of the fetus, problems with the mother's health. So I would suggest maybe talking to our congressional rep about maybe doing a problem solvers caucus where they can at least come up with a minimum bill for the country that can pass the Congress.
Worth considering. I mean, I'm not sure what all the issues would be, not being a member of Congress myself, but definitely worth considering.
Thank you.
Chris Doyle. Sorry, Chris, let me unmute you there. Hang on. Oh. I unmuted you too, Ed. You're next.
Can you hear me? Okay, hi.
Yes, I got you.
I just wanted to raise the possibility of putting some attention to, here are different commentators who, people like Ross Douthat or that woman Trish, whatever her name is, Tish Warren, talk about how these red states they're going to show their best side. They're going to become very supportive and so on. And I wanted to sort of push the idea that why not call them on the carpet on that and push for the possibility of anti-pregnancy discrimination legislation like Dave Rogers did here a few years ago, paid family leave and so on, that most of these states don't have anything that comes close to. They're talking a good game about how we're going to give people free diapers and, things like that. But, realistically, you have a few commentators that talk about what's actually needed. And a lot of these states should really push for these kind of family-oriented securities that we have here. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that's a big dialogue for it's hard for us to influence that conversation in terms of how they think about it, but hopefully, people within those states will take that up.
Yeah, I'm a little tired of hearing about free diapers. I don't know if anybody else has heard a lot about free diapers, but
yeah, right, wouldn't go very far. Just to start. Ed.
Hi, I'm a lawyer, and I heard your first comment about you think that litigation back and forth would not go anywhere, and I'm a little more concerned about that. There's a full faith and credit requirement that a judgment in Texas should be given full faith and credit in Massachusetts. And if they decide, the threat is as much the problem as the reality. The threat is that somebody's going to sue you and you're going to be liable for the conduct that you engage in Massachusetts in regard to a Texas citizen who comes here, or in the alternative, in regard to medicine that you send to a Texas citizen in Texas from Massachusetts. The threat of that is real, whether or not somebody does or doesn't sue you, and it's going to damper conduct by Massachusetts citizens. So if in fact it went ahead and Texas entered a judgment under what's called long arm jurisdiction, namely that somebody in Massachusetts did something to affect a Texas citizen, which would then give the Texas court the authority to have jurisdiction to enter a judgment against the Massachusetts citizen. I don't see why we wouldn't want to protect that citizen with our own statutes that allow that citizen who engages in lawful conduct to simply recover back against people in Texas who sued them. So maybe I misread what you said initially.
No, look, I think you're absolutely right that there's a bunch of potential headaches there. And those are the kinds of ideas that I can't cite chapter and verse on exactly how our protections against that work, but that specifically is one of the ideas is that we can recover back. So I think that I do stand by the idea that I think there's going to be some kind of limitation on that eventually, but we are taking it very seriously and trying to put, having the best lawyers we can find review exactly what we need to do to protect people.
Great. And we appreciate everything you're doing, and your outreach is just wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. But no, totally well taken, not dismissing it. I just want to offer a long-term assurance, but yes, taking it very seriously as a near-term problem. Jacqueline Daly.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for calling on me. I had just a question. I don't know if I'm completely familiar with the proposed budget. Are we talking about the Amendment 180 for the Roe Act for this year's budget?
Maeve, just check on the number. No, I don't think it's. Go ahead,
688, I think.
688. Okay.
Off the top of my head from this budget, and I can find a link and put in the chat.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, my main question around it is, so like with the influx of people we're expecting to come to Massachusetts to seek care, is that something that the state is like thinking about for like funding in terms of more clinics, and or like how are they determining what areas are going to need more help than others? I feel like abortion is going to be accessible in many of the New England states, but just for like people who may be flying in or something like that. I'm not sure if the state is considering anything.
We're definitely considering that. Definitely considering the possibility that there's some kind of funding need, or we want to be as responsive as we can to the organizations that are actually providing that care, and telling us what they need to make sure that they can accommodate folks that may be coming in. If you want to sort of step back, you could bucket the different things that we're doing to respond into, one, the things that respond to the kind of thing Ed Rabinowitz was just raising. And Maeve, you're going to put that link in the chat to the full language of Senator Friedman's amendment, so people will see what we put into we sometimes, we pass a budget every year for the whole state. And that's something we happened to be doing in May. So when that was coming through, we said, okay, look, we're just going to push this particular issue into that budget. And Maeve's putting the language into the chat. The issue being, how do you protect people who are threatened, where other states are threatening lawsuits for things that might, for getting an abortion here or providing an abortion here. So we're doing that. And that we're trying to do in the most effective way we can. Then the other category of things is all these, another bucket is everything that we can do to help those organizations respond to any increase in demand. And then 3, it's another occasion to make sure that we're doing everything we can in Massachusetts to just support our own citizens in their reproductive health care needs. And every year we look at that and see what else we need to do. And so those are there's over the next couple of weeks, there will be more action on this in the legislature for sure. Both branches want to do it. And so we'll make some progress on all of these fronts.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll be, as we do it, I'll put more information out to my email list. If anybody's not subscribed, willbrownsberger.com/subscribe, and you'll make sure that you get things from me. Jean Trubeck is the next person whose hand I have up. And Frida, after that, you're next.
Questions about what information is private, because it has never occurred to me before this that the prescriptions I take might be public information, or whether or not I'm pregnant, which would be very much surprised at my age, but whether or not, say, my daughter was pregnant would be known to anyone except her. So if somebody traveled here from Texas and then traveled back, how would the state of Texas have any idea that she had gotten an abortion while she was here?
Well, I think a lot of times in practice they're not, and of course we have HIPAA, we have strong healthcare confidentiality rules. I don't know how HIPAA protections. If you had the data, if some of the data was resident in the hands of a Texas, or a company that did business in Texas, like one of these big pharmacy benefit managers that contracts with a lot of insurers to buy them drugs and for their patients. I don't know how that's going to work, but that's an interesting litigation question, and it's the kind of question that we need to make sure we get the best. We do the best we can to protect from subpoenas from outside, but what the Texas courts do with that and what the federal courts in Texas do with that, that's going to be one of those things that could get litigated over the coming days.
It raised a whole new level of worry.
Well, I think it's a concern. I think it's a real concern. Frida?
Hi. So, the fact that we have abortion protection codified in law in Massachusetts is really great, I think. But that doesn't mean that we still don't have barriers in accessibility. Kind of piggybacking on what Jacqueline said earlier, is there anything in like the plan for legislation for this year to help address some of those? Mainly I'm thinking financial. Are there ways that we might be able to get more insurance coverage for lower income people who are seeking abortion, or ways to remove some of those financial barriers that do affect lower income people in our state now, just with like the laws that we do have, even though they have like the legal right to it, they may not have the accessibility to it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a critical issue and something that we keep coming back to. So I think we'll be looking at, some of the kinds of things that we'll be looking at would be making sure that all insurers cover abortion and that there's no co-pays, so that people are not going to be held back. There's the issue of access to medication abortion on college campuses. So there's a list of things that we need to go down and just ask, are there ways where we can make it better? And you're going to see that happen over the next couple of weeks. Every session we've been doing this, right? We knew this was coming. Of course, access has always been an issue. Sex education has always been an issue. And by the way, that's one thing we haven't been able to get through is our so-called Healthy Youth Act, which is a sex education bill. But we passed what we called the Nasty Women Act, which was repealing the various archaic prohibitions on contraception and abortion. And then last year we passed the Roe Act, which was designed to codify and take to a higher level the right to abortion in Massachusetts and make that crystal clear that everybody has that right, regulate that, remove regulations that are a barrier and put a clean frame around it. And then now we'll be back to it this year to respond to the kind of things that the threats from out of state, and also to ask what more we can do.
Cool, thanks.
There is a whole group, by the way, there's the Beyond Roe Coalition. So there's a whole 21-point agenda, which we'll be picking up as much of as we can. Thank you. Beth. Oh, Beth, you know what? Beth, I lost you there. You want to put your hand up again? Is it Beth Young? Is that who you had? Beth.
Yep.
There you go. Continue.
I'm here. Yes, thank you.
You're on.
It's on. Okay,
Yep.
thank you. I think going all the way back to what you mentioned in the beginning about there's so many diverse views on this important issue. I think it's important to note that's basically exactly what the Supreme Court said, that because there's so many diverse views, it really does belong constitutionally as a state's issue. And it was Roe actually that usurped, which still exists today, by partisan majorities on both sides of the issue that support more restrictions and more health and safety standards. And I don't know, I apologize who it was that mentioned the free diapers thing. It's well beyond that there's pro-life laws that are put forth for hospital transfers, for women's safety in case of complications, and there's prenatal child support and all sorts of tax relief, and there's financial, education, housing, all sorts of aids that go many, many, many years past birth. And so my question would be, given on the abortion side of the access, and a lot of it is now, it's about half of abortions are the chemical medical abortions, that actually has the highest death rate, the maternal mortality rate, and hemorrhage concerns and all sorts of stuff. It's basically the back alley inside your house. Do it yourself, no doctor, and even some laws have repealed needing access through a physician, having an in-person exam first. And so women with ectopic pregnancies or confirming gestational age, because the risks are greater the further the weeks, I think it's only approved up to 10 weeks, but illegal sources, even illegal transport, storage, improper development. There's people that are providing these drugs that they're already dangerous. They're already regulated by FDA's RIMS, risk mitigation program. And so there's all sorts of things that are violating those safety regulations. And then when you now are going to have women traveling, there's things that could be enabling even trafficking of minors. So what is in place here in Massachusetts for women's safety for these chemical abortions and for the transports?
Well, I want to say I'm glad that there's diversity of views on this call. I come from a certain place, and so I respect you for being on this call and bringing out a different perspective. I think the key is to make sure that people are getting good health care, and they so we're trying to make good quality reproductive health care so that if people are using medications, they're advised as to best how to use them to make sure that they protect themselves and accomplish their goals without having any difficulties.
So does Massachusetts have on the books or the plans for the legislation that you're going to be working on include hospital admitting privileges for women's continuity of care in case of complications, or any other safeguards like in-person exams so that they can access it through a physician and not just these dangerous by mail access? I'm not aware that we are trying to do something new on that. I think we have confidence in the healthcare framework that we have in Massachusetts. It's something we do relatively well. Well, I think given the complication and death rate, specifically of medical abortions, it would behoove for women's safety to have in-person exams to confirm that there's no ectopic pregnancy, confirm gestational age, confirm she has access to emergency care in case of complication, et cetera. And for accountability as well.
Thank you.
So that women don't suffer complications and then there's no recourse.
We'll give that some thought and see if we're missing anything there.
Sounds like it.
Okay. Fair enough. Tony Barnes? Tony, I need to unmute you.
Can you hear me all right?
Ken, yep.
Okay. So my question, I know that a lot of this is on the sort of core holding around Roe. I'm curious, you talked about some of the things that we're doing in Massachusetts to ensure access continues post Roe. Can you speak for a minute about what else you might be doing for the future of looking forward with this court, the likelihood of other due process related rulings being overturned? So particularly with Thomas's concurring opinion, it sounded like gay marriage, contraception, a number of other things are likely to face legal challenge in the future. Are we doing things to ensure that in Massachusetts they will still stay legal and accessible and safe?
Yes.
When those things occur.
Yeah. So look, that's a really important thought. So the thought there is that, look, at least one justice, really only one justice, said that Thomas is willing to re-examine the whole line of cases, which goes back to the 19th century, that says that people do have some sacred kind of control over their body as a core right protected by the Constitution. Only one justice has said that, and most of the other justices really tried to make clear in different ways. And the majority opinion tries to say, look, we're really not going after the rest of these things. We think abortion is different because it involves the state's interest in potential life, or potentially involves another life that's already there, another person that at some point is already there. So they tried to draw a distinction, but I didn't find it too persuasive the way they drew that. So I don't think they're about to do that, but I think it's a concern we should be concerned about where it goes next. So in Massachusetts, that means the first thing we want to do is make sure there aren't laws that are on our books that would infringe people's rights. In fact, there are, and in fact, we're going to repeal some of them on Thursday. There are at least there are a couple of different laws that go back that prohibit the so-called, in colonial language, abominable act, aka sodomy, anal sex. And then there's another. Then that's a 20-year felony under Massachusetts law. And then there's there's a statute which prohibits so-called unnatural and lascivious acts, which basically means any other kind of sex that other than heterosexual coitus. And though that's a 5-year felony under Massachusetts law. Both of those laws, neither of those laws is enforced now because of the ideas of privacy, which in part derive from that whole line of federal cases, which has now been questioned. So yes, we're taking those off the books on Tuesday. On Thursday. That's actually been something that others have been working on for a couple of decades to get that to the top of the list of things to get done, and something I've worked on for a few years, but it is coming to the top of the list, and we're getting rid of those. We'll be on our lookout for others. We did kind of look around for others, and so we're not aware of others that are of an immediate sort of loaded gun sitting there in the hidden in the weeds for when the court precedents change. But I think we will definitely be putting those. I think it's really about getting rid of old bad laws, because marriage is secure in the Commonwealth. That our Constitution. Margaret Marshall and the legislature have given that clear protection.
Thank you. I really appreciate hearing that and what you're doing with those things.
Thank you. Elizabeth Coons. Let's see, how are you doing there? You should be able to unmute yourself.
All right. Okay. I think I'm unmuted. Am I?
Yes, you are.
Right. Okay. Well, apropos of the prior comment, and perhaps a bit wider, I'm particularly worried about what the sort of anti-administrative state vein of the court might do about the EPA. If they seem, I'm not. This isn't about privacy, so maybe
that's okay.
All right. Okay. Well, I think that's going to be really important, and I'd like to empower anyone. There are a couple of lines that we might use for that. I think one is that the Constitution must have presumed English common law as its backdrop. I think you can show that.
People generally, they certainly see that. I mean, they do. Yeah.
Okay, and English common law does not, it's not incremental in its rights. It doesn't presume that only if a right is specifically articulated, is it protected. It goes the other way, I think. It implies that only forbidden things are forbidden. Only explicitly forbidden things are forbidden. I believe that one of the so-called originalist arguments is that no right that is not specified in the Constitution is in fact protected. And that assumption is, I think, the most dangerous part of this whole thing, because that assertion would make, among other things, everybody have to worry constantly about whether what they're planning to do is specified or not. And I think that's absolutely counter to the spirit of English common law.
You know what? I think that's a really important statement. And I think that was really a statement that was just a problem that was discussed by the founders that really bothered some people, that if you listed, this is one of the things in the Federalist debate, if you just went out and listed the various rights, would it imply that those were the only rights that people had? So that's why they added the Ninth Amendment, which says, and I'll just read it.
Oh, good.
The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people.
Well, that is wonderful. I'm glad that exists. I'm surprised it's not been used in this case because, partly because English common law doesn't say anything about, preterm fetuses. It doesn't tell mothers they can't manage their bodies, etc. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you get into a long conversation about what were they actually doing back then. But as I say, I believe that the Constitution, implies a clear right of security in one's own person, and that right is, I think, kind of also specifically honored by the Ninth Amendment. And you obviously constitutional scholars will debate the number of angels on the top of this pin, but
Okay.
I that's my America, and that's the way I'm reading it. And I think we're in good company, although not universal, unfortunately. Well taken. Okay, let's see. So, Alan and Barbara, let me ask you to unmute. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Are we unmuted now?
Yes, we're unmuted.
Yes, you are. You're good.
Thank you, Will, for always reaching out with important topics. A number of issues come to mind, some of which have been touched upon already. One is the freedom to cross state lines to travel without being impeded. And I've looked high and low in the Constitution for words that said that explicitly, and I'm not finding it. It's implied, but it's implied in a number of places, but I don't see it spelled out in the way that some of the other rights are spelled out. So I think that whether or not the long arm statute will be able to enable a state like Texas to reach across to Massachusetts and try to snare a woman who comes here for an abortion or medical abortion pills. I don't know how safe she will be or she won't be. I mean, I am concerned. I'm also concerned about the whole premise was saying that what's not in the Constitution at the time of passage is up for grabs. Well, women were certainly a non-existent entity at the time of the writing of the Constitution. Many medical procedures were non-entities at that time. So you have that pitted against a very false conception of history and what the Constitution is about, or what it's supposed to do to protect citizens on an equal basis. It certainly isn't looking at the 13th Amendment, which says no involuntary servitude, which an unwanted pregnancy forced would be involuntary servitude. There is no duty to rescue. If you have perfectly good limbs or a kidney or an eye, and somebody in your sphere of influence is in need of one to maintain life, there is no duty whatsoever to sacrifice your own organs in order to save the life of another. And then the other thought that I have that is very troubling, and it's been talked about not here tonight, but it's been talked about in the newspaper. It's totally against, as written, this case is totally against the Jewish religion, even from the Orthodox perspective. An Orthodox Jewish woman who finds herself pregnant and feels that she must get an abortion has to go before a Jewish court, which is called the Beit Din. And that's adjudicated by 3 male rabbis. They don't think in monolithic terms. They do indeed authorize abortion when it is to save the mental health as well as physical health of the woman. And this particular case now overrides their ability to have any kind of power in their own court. So most of the Jewish community is far more liberal about that, but it's even now touched the Orthodox, which is an irony because in the past, they went hand in glove with the anti-choice movement.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for all of that. Just to pick up one thing that you said at the beginning, that is, I think there is pretty clear precedent on the right to travel, even though those words aren't exactly in the court. There's a good Wikipedia article on it, and interestingly, in Kavanaugh's concurring opinion, which was sort of seemed to be trying to say, look, we're only going to go so far. He did sort of say something like, the right to travel is something that we'll make short work of that if people challenge that. He said so. He offered a little bit of assurance on that, although I'm not going to take his assurances too far to the bank, as Susan Collins found out.
By the way, I question that statistic that the problems with medical abortion, according to that young woman who gave us her concerns about the pill, I have not read anything that said the outcome of medical abortion shows a worse statistic than giving birth or having a surgical abortion.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that we all should check on, check those facts. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Actually, there's a thing that concerns me. It's sort of a standing back and looking at the problem level. And that is, and I've heard it on the networks, we now seem to be totally under minority rule. The last time a Republican was elected with a popular vote was, I think, George H.W. Bush. And the only Republicans that have served since then never won the majority. And now the court has a 6-3 majority on the far right. And they and a lot of the state legislatures, which are heavily Republican, are now running the country.
They're definitely running their own states, it's kind of built in the way it's worked out that our structure does give the Republicans an advantage beyond being beyond their number of actual votes, especially in the Senate and the Electoral College. There's no question. Absolutely.
I always wondered why there's 2 Dakotas and they each have 2 senators.
There you go. Too late to make a merge, but I think we're stuck with that. Leanne Kozer.
Hi there. Thanks, Will, for hosting this forum. I think one of the things that concerns me most right now is, obviously we're codifying our laws, but if a federal law is put in place, will our codified laws protect women in terms of choice and in terms of contraception, which we know that Justice Thomas is now going after next? What is in place to ensure that Massachusetts will have these laws evergreen?
So I think usually the Supreme Court's role has been to say you can't restrict people's rights in a certain way, right? You can't restrict their right to contraception. You can't restrict their right to abortion. You can't restrict their right, the sex they choose. This decision, we've stepped back. They've said not that you must restrict their right or that anybody will, but that you may restrict the women's rights to abortion. That's what they're saying to the states. So in Massachusetts, our political commitment is extremely strong. Our courts have been extremely strong in interpreting our own constitution. There's a strong commitment to individual rights, equality of marriage, women's right to choose. And I don't think that's going to go away in Massachusetts. I think that's very enduring political commitment. 200 years from now, I don't know what's going to be happening, but if we can see 50 or 100 years out, it's really hard for me to see Massachusetts going in a different direction. I think there is what I view as a small threat that Congress could try to go in the wrong direction on some of these issues and try to pass some kind of federal law. I think there's enormous political difficulty in imagining them being able to do that. And I think enormous political risk for the Republicans in even trying, notwithstanding what Mike Pence said the other day about national law against abortion. I think that's sort of red meat for his crowd, but I don't think that's. I'm giving you my own political prognostication, but we're going to do everything we can from where we sit as a state government to protect the rights of our citizens, and I'm pretty hopeful that we're going to be able to do that.
Okay, and just to the point of the dangers of medical abortion, looked up a peer-reviewed study, and it is negligible to extremely small and extremely rare 0.3% of medical abortions may end up with needing attention in a medical setting. So it's extremely safe and extremely effective and an excellent option for women to have choice in their lives and in their family planning.
Thank you for bringing those facts forward. Thank you. Russell Rico.
Will, am I unmuted?
Yep, you're unmuted.
Okay. Will, normally I try to stay clear of these kind of issues because people are entrenched in both sides and a lot just don't want to come to any kind of a reasonable compromise. But what has prompted me today with this is that I cannot stand the rhetoric that's coming out of Washington with the United States senators and United States representatives adding fuel to the fire in this issue and going overboard. Now, I'm a lifelong resident of Massachusetts. Everybody can rest assured that there'll be enough safeguards put in by the legislature that no one in Massachusetts is going to be affected. None of their rights are going to be denied. Okay? Now, and again, United States Senator or United States Congressman, because the rattlesnake will rattle and give me a warning before he bites me. And all the time. So again, that's where my frustration. Now, I'm a firm believer that we've allowed the federal government, the overpowering central government, to have too much power our founding fathers warned us about this. And the name of the game is we've got to let the states make decisions on so many issues. And this is one of them, okay? Now, to put this all in some kind of perspective, all right? And let me break this down into some categories, okay? First of all, we have the abortion profiteers, those that make money from the procedure and also selling body parts. We have a person that does not want to have a child. We have abortion in the first trimester, with the majority may or may not like it, but most people will accept it at that point, okay? Then we have abortion in the third trimester. At that point, the child can live outside the mother's womb. That's what most people object to, okay? And, you know, when I think of my whole lifetime, people that I've met over the years, individuals, family members, that have had family members with seriously challenged defects, and they sacrifice themselves and show love, and they do it out of love, and they feel happy doing it. You know, I know someone that's 79 years old. His grandson was bought about 20 years ago. Now, he could be spending his time in Florida because he can afford it. But instead, he's dedicated the last 20 years of his life to take care of this grandson. And I'll tell you, I love him for it, because that really is a person of love and everything else. But to have abortion on demand, and again, I don't want the government stepping in anything, but you have to examine your own conscience, is that it reaches a point where you just should not have an abortion at some point, because you are executing a child at that point. Now, and I understand the game of politics, you refer to as a fetus in the beginning, and of course, that dehumanizes it, okay? But we're talking about a baby that can live outside of the mother's womb. And I think that's where the line has to be drawn. And I would rather it be drawn not by the government, but by instilling one to think in their own conscience of the fact that this is not right to do. And so if you're going to do it, take care of it in the first trimester. So, and again, these are tough subjects, but I really wish that everybody would look at it from someone else's perspective and to try to compromise in every way that you can.
Thank you, Russ. Thank you for joining the conversation with that view. Let's see. Mel, you're up next, Mel. But are you? I'll come. I'm going to recognize you, Mel, because you're Mel. But I do want to make sure I get to people who haven't spoken before. I've got 4 or 5 people in line, or actually 6 or 7. You're on, Mel.
No, I was just going to mention, just in passing, I mentioned, as I started out with, that at the Supreme Court, in their recent action against New York's open carry gun law, I'm just wondering, wondering, have you thought about this and other members of the legislature about the possibility of a Supreme Court action being taken if certain legal action is proposed, that they then take action in the measures that we've put in place, that they in some way challenge what we've put on the books?
Yeah.
I'm sure New York thought the same thing when they had their open carry law, as we have. And then all of a sudden, the Supreme Court, unbeknownst to them and to many people's surprise, made a judgment against them. So it becomes a matter of, okay, even though the states have taken a position, have passed legislation, the Supreme Court has come behind them, and because of the opinion of a few, have decided, no, I think we know better. So we're going to supersede your legislative action, and we're going to put something in place ourselves. So I'm just wondering, has that thought?
Yeah. Look, jumping to the other big case from last week, clearly our law, which does give police chiefs the authority to sort of say, do you really need a gun, is very much like New York's law, and is very much, that's something else we need to pay some attention to over the next 5 or 6 weeks. We're going to need to do something different there. I mean, I suppose we could let somebody challenge it, but I have a concern that, yeah, we're going to lose that because we're too much like what New York had. That's very much on the radar screen. Tim Flood.
All right.
Hey, Tim, you're on.
Yes, thank you. Just a question in regards to going back to the abortion piece here. Is there thought being put into, everyone touched on a little bit, but other aspects of healthcare around that, such as IVF and things like that, that are being looked at to be intertwined into our current / future laws to protect those in the future as well?
Yeah, I've heard people thinking about that. I don't quite have my mind around how that stuff ties in, but it could tie in. I mean, it's clearly in the whole reproductive health space, and how that fits together, I'm not sure, but people are talking about that somewhat.
And just one comment that I have, just a general comment, just listening to everyone.
Please.
I hear a lot of concerns about not having access and things like that, which is obviously a true statement. But I would just remind everyone that because we are Massachusetts, it is more likely that someone is going to have access to a doctor versus a pill, but they at least have the choice. So I feel like there's a little more concern being put on that than may be necessary. And obviously I could be, mistaken on that, but based upon kind of how from my perspective, I think because we have such current strong laws, we're working on to strengthen them even more. The ability to see a doctor is, traditionally relatively easy in Massachusetts. So it seems like that should be a little bit less of a concern. Just again, kind of sitting here looking at it from the outside, I hear the concerns, I understand the concerns, but I'm not quite sure that they should be as concerned with that particular piece.
The concern that someone might not get the medical supervision, is that what you're saying?
Correct. So, obviously, we have some of the best caregivers in the world here. And we have a choice to go to a caregiver at pretty much any point in time. And where other states that might not necessarily be the case. But it seems like here that our ability to see a caregiver versus only having the option for a pill, but again, it's just from the outside looking in, it seems like we definitely have more access to doctors for the care as needed.
Well, I'd like to believe that's true, and I think it is true that we've got good access here in Massachusetts. We'll keep working on making it better. Thank you. Barbara Jane. You're next, Fred Hapgood. And you're after him, Bill Rhodey. Are you there, Barbara? Not hearing you, although you look like you're unmuted. Barbara? Okay, so I'll go to you, Fred. Go ahead.
Okay, so first I want to check that I understand something about the law, and then I have a question. It's my understanding that Texas has a law such that if I put up a friend of mine who comes from Texas to here to have an abortion, and they find out about it, that I can be sued. Is this correct?
That's the kind of thing they're trying to do. I'm not sure what they've actually written. But that's the kind of concern, to make sure that they can't really do that, or if they recover here, our courts will give an automatic recovery against the person who sued in Texas to wipe it out. As I said, I think that kind of game is not going to go very far. It's not. I think the Supreme Court is not going to really condone that. But we are taking that kind of threat seriously and trying to, talking to the best lawyers we can and trying to put things in place that will prevent that from being a problem for people.
Texas from passing whatever laws it wants. Now, here's my question. Is this ridiculous? And feel free to tell me that this is ridiculous. is it ridiculous? Would it then be ridiculous for Massachusetts to respond by passing a law saying that anybody that tries to sue one of us for helping an abortion person is themselves liable and can be sued from our direction?
Yeah, no, yeah, that's not ridiculous. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous, but yeah, that's something, that's one of the kinds of responses that people are talking about. And I don't know, Maeve, whether you can.
I think that's part of what Connecticut did.
Connecticut did, and I'm not sure whether we chose that particular device, but that's definitely in the mix of the conversation about how to deal with this.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and I hope I wouldn't mind at all if something like that happened to get on the legislature's, agenda.
We are definitely going to do things to respond to that, and I'm not sure what the final mix is going to be, but the Senate has passed language, the House has language on the table. We are going to address that over the next couple of weeks, for sure.
Thank you.
I want to try to come back to Barbara Jane. I see you there. I'm asking you to unmute, Barbara. See your hand still up. You should be able to speak. I'm going to come back to you again. Can't hear you yet, but I'll go to Bill Rohde. And if you're successful, and we'll try you again, Barbara, in a few. Bill Rohde?
Yeah, I'm on?
You're on.
First, a comment. You mentioned that only Justice Thomas said, he was after all the other rights. But I wouldn't be complacent about that. I think there's been a movement ever since the New Deal to get rid of lots of rights, to get rid of Social Security, Medicare. I would be very vigilant about a very organized movement that's trying to undo all these things. But my question is on the one that terrifies me is this gun ruling. So I have a question. The way I understand the ruling on the New York law is they said the state can't just say who needs to carry a gun. But can carrying be restricted on a different basis that would not violate that ruling? Namely, yes, anyone. We're not going to decide who. It's just you need 4 years of training to carry a gun in public. You need the equivalent of police training to be allowed to do that. So now it's not we're deciding whether you need it. It's just we're deciding a minimum standard. And a related issue is if the rationale that the court seems to have conveyed that people need to carry guns to protect themselves, what do people 90 years old, blind people, people who they would never give a gun permit to, how do they protect themselves? And is there sort of a civil rights basis for restricting the carrying of guns? Because I'm terrified about living in a place where I don't know who's carrying a gun and I'm just going to stay home. I don't want to live in a society like that. So there's two parts to it, is the criteria for licenses versus the civil rights issue.
I think I understand the point that you want to live in a society where there's not a risk of gunfire, and of course that's what gun control has always been about. And it's interesting, when you look at some of the history, the first places that prohibited carrying of guns were places out west, in the territories, the sort of okay corral spaces, which they were sort of saying, look, no more guns in here because there's too much shooting going on. And that's not unlike some of the problems we have in a few places now. And so that's why people do want to limit access to guns and limit their presence on the streets. I think that we will be able to look at, devise a set of objective criteria that relate to suitability to having a weapon. I mean, if the Supreme Court has said you can't put limits on the purpose of owning a weapon, and especially discretionary limits, and that's what I take from that. But I think in terms of suitability, criminal background checks and perhaps other metrics, other situations that might disqualify somebody from owning a gun, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to craft something that is in effect as strong as what we have now, but maybe different from what we have now.
Yeah, so those criteria maybe are not, the Supreme Court ruling doesn't restrict such criteria. But then you didn't comment on, how about people who just, no way you're going to get a license to have a gun that you can carry in public if you're blind?
If you're blind.
How does that person protect himself? And is that the basis for restriction? Is that a possible basis for restricting everyone? Or pass a law that every blind person is entitled to have a policeman, escort? I am legally blind. That's why I'm asking this question. And I'm sure there's lots of categories of people who, is the state sanctioning that it's okay, that it's okay to carry a gun as the only way to protect yourself? Or do we want to build a society where, that's just not necessary?
Look, we all want to build a society where that's just not necessary. And that's where we want to be. And in fact, we don't want, but what we most want to do is make sure that people with ill intent, who are unsuitable for, who terrorize others. So the kind of things, are going to have guns. And I think there is enough precedent in, the review of history that is in that opinion does include ideas like, it was okay to limit guns being carried in such a way as to terrorize others. There are definitely suitability concepts that are there. So I'm hopeful that the Supreme Court would, even this Supreme Court would uphold, things like criminal background checks and, which we have in place. So I don't think we're going to lose those. And I think we may be able to strengthen those without stepping across this court's lines. We will find out.
Okay, I have counter questions, but I think it's time to go. I can raise them at another time because this debate could go on all night.
Okay. Yeah. Well, feel free to.
I'm happy with your responses and appreciate what you've said.
All right. Thank you. All right. So I guess I'm coming back now to people who have, let me see. I'm going to recognize people who haven't spoken yet first. I see Frida and Russ. I'm going to try to give Barbara another chance. Barbara, take another chance, Barbara. Are you there, Barbara? I'm going to assume Barbara's not really there. Okay. Jim Sharp. Let me recognize Jim Sharp.
Hi, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I don't really have much on the abortion side. I've been following everyone's great discussion, but I did want to ask a question about the gun thing, simply because I lived in Texas for a few years. I lived in Alabama. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're good.
So I'm just curious about something. Has anyone ever taken the approach of population density as a natural way to provide some basis for a restriction, at least of open carry off the property? Because it terrifies me in a place like, like a city like Boston or New York or even Dallas or Houston, where, from two fronts. One is, I'm not a fan of concealed carry because I'm thinking the police wouldn't like that. If you don't know who has a gun, it's chaos. The second part of it is, if it's a density issue where there's just lots of people, I don't want people walking around Target where there's 2,000 people. Has that ever come up at all?
Well, of course, that's a central concern from the standpoint of those of us who believe in gun control. This court seemed to say, if I'm recalling what I took from that opinion correctly, that they don't think density per se or urbanicity per se is a place to exclude, is a basis for excluding the use of guns. They say, that was only done in a couple of territories and they don't count, which to me is an example of the manipulability of legislative, sort of history as a way of interpreting the Constitution. I thought the opinion, history is so hard to read and you have to weigh things differently and you choose to say, this doesn't mean anything, but hey, it does. I mean, there's a lot of good reasons you don't want people carrying guns in crowded places.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And thanks for the Zoom calls. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining. Thanks for offering the comment and the thought. I'm going to give Barbara another chance. Go for it, Barbara. You've come back to the top. She's in the chat, but all right, we just can't hear you, Barbara. I'm going to lower your hand and then come back if you think you want to try again. Jim DeCoulis. Jim, how you doing? Haven't spoken. Jim, I'm sorry. I have not unmuted you. You need to, there you go.
Okay, great. Good evening, Will. Thank you for hosting this. This is a great discussion. I wanted to bring up both the Dobbs case on the abortion matter, as well as the New York State rifle case on gun control. Just getting back to the Dobbs case, I can't help but imagine what Hillary Clinton is feeling right now. Just thinking about that whole election and how the whole court got lost. But I think what you were just talking about, though, Will, and Jim and Elizabeth had brought up was the whole concept of originalism that the majority seems to be adopting under Scalia's probable early take on how originalism should unfold. There's a lot of discussion here about the rights that existed, and it seems to me like the 14th Amendment is the right that we're all relying on for the abortion. But I just can't help but think why there's no discussion of the men here. I mean, this is all about women and women's health, but as a man, I just feel embarrassed that there's no discussion about our gender and our contribution to this problem. The second point I wanted to bring up is how Chief Justice Roberts really tried to strike a balance. And I know Politico had a great article on how he lost the court, but it was an interesting point that he tried to take, a ground that he tried to take to try to bring the majority together. And his discussion of the viability rule that I guess it's at 15 weeks at which a fetus potentially is viable, I thought was an interesting way to try to balance some of this. Even though I disagree with it, I'm side with the minority on how people should be doing whatever they want with their rights and the liberties that the 14th Amendment apparently protected. So I'd be interested just to hear some feedback from you on that. But getting to the New York rifle case and gun control that Jim was talking about as well. On the PBS NewsHour about 20 years ago, Jim Lehrer had Chief Justice Warren Burger on talking about the Second Amendment. And Chief Justice Burger brought up the Second Amendment and he started reading it. And it seems to me like no one has really read the Second Amendment thoroughly. I mean, because it all starts with a well-regulated militia. A well-regulated militia necessary to the security of a free state. And no one seems to like bring up or think about the first part of that sentence of the Second Amendment. So I'd be curious to know why we haven't focused more on the well-regulated militia. And I'm going to post a link to Chief Justice Warren Burger's interview right now on the chat session. I encourage people to watch it because what he described is the NRA's effort is essentially has been since like the 1970s. And I guess it started in 1977. There was an interesting show that Megnachuk Marbardi on Point had with a gentleman named Smythe, Frank Smythe, I think was his name. And he talked about how the whole NRA issue unfolded. But I really love to hear people's take on why we don't talk about the well-regulated militia for the Second Amendment. Thank you.
Well, that is something that is an interesting question. And it has been talked about, and I can't quite offer the scholarship to say why that point has not prevailed. I will come back to your point about the problems with the originalist approach. I mean, I think the opinion itself is a great example of the manipulability of history. I mean, history, the interpretation, it's not like if you go with an originalist approach, you get a clear answer because history is pretty manipulable. The other problem I have, and I said this earlier, is look, the ideas in the Constitution are better than history. I mean, they're stronger than history. Ideals of equality, ideals of personal space, which are in the Constitution, they contradict what was happening in 1790 and 1860. We're not there. We shouldn't be interpreting them in the light of the sordid things that were going on then. We should be interpreting them in the light of what they say and the ideals that they represent. And I think that's where I think the arc of history in our country has been trying to realize. We said all men were created equal. We said that 250 years ago almost, and we're still trying to get there. So
yeah, and they forgot about Black Americans, right? When
that's the point. That's the point. That's the point.
But Will, and as far as the originalist view, at that time when the Second Amendment was written, we're fighting the British, right? And we're all trying to defend ourselves from the monarchy and declare our freedom. And clearly the originalism perspective has shortfalls, in today's society. But Chief Justice Berger's point in this interview was if the militia could be well regulated back then, why can't we well regulate our people today?
Yeah. Yep. I think that's a valid line of argument. It's a valid line of argument. Definitely should be a stronger part of the First Amendment the Second Amendment jurisprudence.
Great. Thank you, Will.
Thank you. Elizabeth Goss. Thanks for coming back, Liz. I was looking forward to your comment, so you're on, I think. No, you can't. You're not. Hang on a second. I'm going to get you. There we go. There we go. How about that? Can you unmute now?
I think so.
There you go.
Got it now? Great. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate this forum. Well, I really appreciate the intellectual discussion. As you know, I'm a lawyer, but one of the things that I'm most interested in is what's the strategy. So I think we can argue about the nuances of this decision until, for the next 100 years. Bottom line is that these justices who claim to be, I heard in law school, when I was in law school 20 years ago, about Democrats being judicial activists. We know who the judicial activists are. We know exactly where this is going. It's going to a federal abortion ban. We know what the game plan is. They've been working on this for 40 years. What's our plan? What about court packing? And I don't care if that term is derogatory. I want it. I want court packing considered. I want jurisdictions, considered. And this is all at the federal level. I realize that you're a state senator. I truly appreciate it.
Yeah.
But, I don't want fundraising emails. I want to understand what the plan is. And Mel, this is for you too. If he's still on.
Here's what I think. You're absolutely right. Really powerful response at the federal level is merited. I think the truth is that our guys can't deliver that. They can say, let's do all those things, so. I think, like Joe Biden, somebody was emailing me earlier today.
Yeah, I agree with you. No, I agree with you on that, Will, that we can't deliver it. But what's the plan to get it delivered? Like, what's the baby steps? We need 2 more senators. We need, Fetterman in Pennsylvania to cancel out Manchin, and somebody else in another state to cancel out this one. We don't have that. We don't have that clear plan of action from our party. And it's disappointing.
I think you're right. I think if you probably talk to them, they'd say, "Well, we're trying," and they'd say we're trying to do that. But I don't know whether to blame them or to feel sorry for them. But it's not a pretty picture.
Yeah. Well, maybe they need to hire some people who can put it together for them. I know some.
Yeah. All right. Well, down for that. I mean, go for that. That's a conversation. I'd love to see. By the way, I'm going to do this, and Jeff Hansel from Belmont Media Center is on the call. And maybe Jeff,
yes,
we're going to try to do a forum in July. We're going to try to get some federal participation in that, right?
From Representative Clark's office, if we can.
Ideally, we can get Representative Clark. I mean, I think it'd be interesting to ask some of our national Democrats exactly that question. Our strategy here is to make Massachusetts strong, and that's kind of my zone. But the larger the larger strategy, we do need to hear that. We want to hear that.
Yeah, we're gonna try to have a forum around July 26th. That's our plan anyway. So see what happens.
So I think that's a totally fair question, Liz, and I'd like to know the answers myself. And I think it's bigger than any one person, and it's a big conversation to sort of try to move it forward. But it's big and it's deep. Both of those things. Thank you for that. So let me just make sure that I've recognized everybody who hasn't spoken yet. Anybody else want to weigh in who hasn't spoken yet? You can pop up your hand. There's lots of folks listening, and that's just fine. All right, I see Eva Webster. Go ahead, Eva.
Very simple question. On what basis the lady before me made the assertion that for a complete ban on abortion? Because if this court really wanted to do that, they would take this opportunity to do it right now. They are very well positioned with the majority. They only issued a decision that throws the legislating of this issue back to the states. So we are not really in danger of losing our access to abortion in liberal states like Massachusetts. And this whole hoopla about, oh my gosh, the end of the world is coming, is just totally politically motivated. And so, I understand that some people are just have this black and white view that, the Republicans are against any women's right and this and that. There are plenty of Republican women or women who are independent and they are in favor of right to abortion, but they want some reasonable restrictions to prevent some really abortion, which I understand in Massachusetts right now is actually highly controlled. So it's not happening. We need to stop thinking in black and white terms. There are good arguments on both sides. I mean, I'm not spring chicken. I've known many women in my life, relatives and so on. And I know that in certain situations, abortion was justified. It was horrifically painful psychologically, but it was necessary. In other cases, it was not necessarily, and from the perspective of the time, it would have been perhaps better than that the baby had been born. And we should have, instead of just sending a message to young women that abortion just should be on demand, you just snap your fingers and everyone will jump to assist you to get rid of your pregnancy. It sends a message to some very young, inexperienced, unsophisticated women that they can just fool around, and this is a form of birth control, okay? So the thing is that when I listen to all this discussion, there's just so much missing. There's more refinement and fine-tuning of thinking that is needed. We shouldn't be politicizing it because people of all political persuasions, get pregnant or impregnate women. And it has nothing to do with politics, really nothing to do with politics. The bottom line is that, we need to be investing in supporting our families of American people, so they wouldn't feel compelled to have abortions for economic reasons. But it doesn't mean that we should be offering, taxpayer-funded subsidies to unmarried mothers, as we have been doing, because it kills the concept of fatherhood and traditional family. So look what has been done, to the African American communities, when it actually pays for women to have multiple kids and send the fathers away because it just, gives them means of survival on public assistance because of having all those illegitimate children. And I'm not saying that it's only African American women who do that, because it really is not connected just to the skin color. So anyway, there was a gentleman who spoke before, and it really resonated with me, that it's kind of embarrassing to see people tying this issue to politics. And the reason it happens is because we have media that are just so obnoxiously partisan that they play every issue that is currently, the subject du jour as a political matter, because they're anticipating midterms. But we are all people. We all live in this country, and we need to have at least a two-party system. We cannot allow. Even I used to be for many years a committed Democrat. I was on my local Democratic ward committee and everything, until I had an epiphany that I cannot be a tool in making this state or this country into a single party state or country.
So Eva,
yeah.
Can I?
That's it. I'm sorry. I took so long. But just basically, please don't politicize it. But admit that this is a complex issues, and just make sure that you are respectful of all choices, and that you understand why some people are concerned that abortion is overused and used by inexperienced young women just as a way of preventing motherhood, because it's immoral to screw around and then just go and get an abortion.
Okay. Just to pick up, just to go back to the beginning of the comment, which took issue with what Elizabeth had said about the Republican strategy. Elizabeth was referring to statements by the Vice President Pence that he actually is trying to put a national ban on abortion. So that's a pretty prominent statement by a Republican. The Supreme Court's not going to do that, but he's proposing to do that as a political matter. I think he's trying to carve out the right lane in the Republican presidential primary. I don't think that's ever going to happen, but I think it is terrifying and deeply concerning. So did you want to get back in, Frida? Were you raising your hand? Hang on a second. There you are. Oh, sorry. Try again. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to respond in a comment to that, in that I think that most people who do support a woman's right to choose agree with you on some of these points, Eva. I think that most people don't want abortion to be a number one option for anybody, because it is a very difficult decision. It's not an easy thing to go through for anybody. I think that there is a lot that we could do to limit the amount of abortions, and that does include more sex education, more access to long-acting reversible birth control, and things like that. But banning abortion is not one of those things. It doesn't actually help limit abortions. It would just limit safe abortions. And the other point I wanted to make was about a comment that came up earlier in regards to second and third trimester abortions, because, this is something that I personally myself, I've been a pro-choice advocate my whole life, and I for a very long time thought that I agreed and thought that this was, unnecessary. I was like, of course, if you're going to have an abortion, have it in the first trimester. I thought that was pretty self-explanatory. And it took me until I actually knew somebody who had to go through one of those to realize how much I didn't understand about that procedure and how much of a heartbreaking and personal medical decision that was, that I personally would never be able to make for anyone else in the world apart from myself. And so I think that I can't be the only person on this call who feels that way. If you don't know somebody who has been through something like that, I encourage you to try to learn more from from people who have had to go through that process and learn more about their stories and just listen to it. Especially if it's something that like you think that is just an easy decision to make when you're 6 or 7 months into a pregnancy, because it's not, and it's a very, very complicated situation that I've come fully around to think that that's actually the type of abortion I feel should be the least regulated, because it is such a matter of life and death between a doctor and the pregnant person. So those are just the 2 points I wanted to bring up. I do think that there is a lot of common ground between people who are pro-life and people who are pro-choice in the fact that people understand that this is not an easy decision for anyone to make, and there are consequences to it. It's just the way that we could actually get there is probably more with allowing people to make decisions for their own bodies and providing support in more medical ways than we have as a society. So that was my point. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. Thank you for kind of bringing us back to the reality of the incredible personal pain and difficulty of what of those choices. Thank you. I think Mark has not spoken. Mark, let me unmute you. Bear with me a second. I think you should be able to. There you go.
Hi. Yes, I agree with some of the points that Eva was mentioning. I do think this is a complex issue, which shouldn't be black or white. It's I think there's some reasonable arguments on both sides, and I think that the politicization of this is unfortunate because there are a lot of complex things to factor in here. One thing I didn't realize is that how out of step we are with the rest of the world. Even in Europe, they do not allow late-term abortions, as far as I can see. I think we're in the same company as China and North Korea and Cuba, a few other countries that allow abortion right up to the day of birth. That's something that's, I think that's what really bothers a lot of people is that the barbarity of that kind of a late-term abortion. I understand it's an issue with the mother, life of the mother, that's different, but these are, that's not going on all the time, but the other thing is the New York case. It's not just about self-defense. I think the framers had in mind, that this was a final check on tyranny. And I think that's the bigger issue that, the New York, the case was about. It's about self-defense, but it's also about a final check when things get out of hand, which is what the framers had in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting to come back to the, what the framers had in mind. I think, I also think that one of the twists that people often don't appreciate is that a lot of the regulation of guns was, and I'm sort of making an argument that a Second Amendment advocate might make, but a lot of the regulation of guns in the 19th century was designed. It was in the South trying to keep guns out of the hands of African Americans, and so there's sort of there's a civil rights dimension to the gun debate, which is kind of deep actually. So that's not a simple one. We have some of the best gun control laws in the country. I'm sorry to see them weaken as a result, potentially as a result of this decision. And I think I'm hopeful we're going to be able to try to actually make them stronger, not weaker. All right, so let's see. Russ, I'll tell you what. I'm back to you, I think. And I think we're getting close to wrap up after this.
Can you hear me well?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to make three quick comments and a question. Okay. First, for that attorney that called that wants to pack the court, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg spoke against that many times. And also, I want to remind anyone that Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia were personal friends that would get together with their families and everything else. And even though one was leaning liberal, the other one leaned conservative, but they could work together. We'll put it that way. So now, the next thing is, okay, we have strong gun control laws here in Massachusetts, which basically I agree with. But what I don't agree with is that a police chief unreasonably withholding someone from getting a license of a gun, a license to carry, without having a review board to look at it immediately. It's just the same thing when someone's by DYS, their children are taken away from. They should be able to go in front of a judge within a week and get something adjudicated and not, let's put it, be falsely accused or something. All right. Now, that other person that mentioned about the third trimester, life and death. Life and death is one thing, and I would agree with that, okay? That the period, okay? Now, there's a big difference between that and choice for convenience or to make your life more comfortable. So that now the last thing I'm going to say is this, well, okay? As far as someone coming from Texas, okay, is there any legal way of giving them temporary residence? And then this way, the abortion would be performed and they'd be a resident of Massachusetts and Texas couldn't come down on them. What do you think of that?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think where you are a resident, I mean, think back to the whole conversation about where did Mitt Romney live when he ran for governor. I mean, that's actually a really complicated question. And the Texas courts would probably be entitled to say, I tell you what, you still got a Texas driver's license, you still got your house in Texas, and I don't care what you say, you're a resident of Texas. But it's definitely, got to keep the list long and keep those ideas out there because it's definitely a problem we need to try to solve. Thanks, Russ.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you. I got Elaine King. Thank you, Elaine. Let me give you the floor. We are getting close to the end here, but so anybody, I don't have a time limit on this, but anybody who wants to jump in, we're if you're thinking about jumping in, we are getting close to the end. So I've got Elaine King. I think you can unmute yourself if you want, Elaine.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. There you go.
Okay, so I've been talking in the chat about freedom of speech, and my concern is there are some states now limiting freedom of speech. If someone wants to have an abortion and they go over state lines, they can be arrested. And so what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think, from a constitutional standpoint, people have a right to travel. That's a well-established right in the Constitution. I don't think a law that prevents people from traveling, period, that prevents them from traveling is going to stand up, even with this Supreme Court.
But who is challenging that?
Well, we're going to see some things play out over the next, weeks, months, year or two, on some of these, I say, crazy ideas. You can say
it's a limit of freedom of speech.
Yeah, no, I think, I'm not an expert.
But a doctor, excuse me, Will, but a doctor that can't advise, or even a friend, it's gotten to the point where a friend can't say, hey, if you can't get an abortion in this state, you can go to the next state. And they're putting in laws in the Midwest that have to do with that.
You're going to see we are seeing legislatures overreach their powers, and they will get smacked down even by this Supreme Court in some respects. But, that's me being hopeful, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
I'm really concerned about that because it seems so restrictive and, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but fascist.
I don't have a problem with that word as applied to some of what's happening right now.
Yeah. Thank you, Will.
Thank you. Tony?
Hi, Will. And do you mind if I take a bit of a sidebar in terms of something a few people have said around sort of civil discourse and the ability of senators and Congress people to get things done? I had a conversation at one point with a senator about how to avoid having, Sean Hannity yelling at Lawrence O'Donnell on every street corner, which I've heard a little bit of at points. And this sense of, where you get your information is how you feel. And the fact that as someone who's an elected official, you have a responsibility to sort of put forward things that are good for the individuals that you represent, but also to put a viewpoint that will get you reelected, right? That will represent a majority of the individuals who you represent. I'm trying to figure out if you have ideas or if others on this call have ideas about how to create a greater sense of responsibility and a greater environment where senators and representatives at the national level have more of the responsibility to compromise and represent things that are good for their constituents, as opposed to things that their constituents will support and send money for and sort of get riled up about. And I'm not sure I'm stating this very well, but I think there's this tendency to, if I tweet something that's an extreme, I will get money, I will get likes, I will get retweets, I will get, reelected in essence, right, by the funding and the support. But if I say we compromised and we came up with something where, let's figure out how to make sure that abortion stays legal where people want it to be legal and stays illegal where people want it to be illegal. And I'm not sure I support that idea, but finding some compromise. I feel like this is on a lot of different issues, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts about how we can structurally try to reduce the amount of that. That conversation.
Yeah. So let me sort of restate. I think what you're saying. There is a tendency, and I think this is true in every era. It may be more true right now for some reasons. It's always easy to get elected by staking out an extreme position. You can inflame people. That's something the founders worried about. They tried to address the concept of faction. They created the federal system thinking that somehow, the structure of the federal system that they were creating would reduce the probability that people would go with extreme ideas and divide themselves into camps. I think today, social media kind of encourages that. I think when you had sort of corporatist media, NBC, ABC, CBS, and just New York Times, Boston Globe, a few channels that people got their information from, there were pros and cons for that. I mean, those channels hid things. They were never perfect, but they definitely overall probably exerted a moderating influence. Whereas now, there's sort of a race to the bottom in terms of what it takes to get people's attention. So I think social media is part of that. I think I'm not sure how the influence of the money thing works, whether that's different now than it is in the past. But there's certainly more challenges in fundraising, the Effective Citizens United, and third-party money coming into campaigns. So there's a lot of dynamics that are making things harder to be the right kind of politician. But I certainly agree that the right kind of politician tries to see multiple sides of the issue and tries to craft solutions that are respectful and allow us all to move forward together. So I don't know. That was a pretty clumsy attempt at answering an extremely deep question. So thanks for that. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. I think we're talked out here. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be with me this evening and to share thoughts. I thank everybody who shared thoughts. I thank everybody who just stayed on and listened. And look forward to continuing dialogue. Feel free to reach out to me as time goes on, and look forward to staying in touch. We'll be working hard on these issues. It's a very difficult thing that's happened. Very big step backwards in my mind, and we'll be doing everything we can at the state level to make sure that everybody here is safe and everybody who comes here is safe. Thanks again.